Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Some people are just so bored and unhappy with their life that they have to try and ruin everybody else's. More right after a short pause. So get ready and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. I want this forwarded to the police. This happened about 2 years ago, but I figured I'd share. I work for a local casino that provides a small bus to bring people to and from the building, servicing local hotspots. There are only 2 coaches that go back and forth through some of these spots, and along the way, one driver picked up a customer who ended up calling in to complain. We'll call him Buddy. Buddy starts out by getting on and letting the driver know that he doesn't have money to pay but hopes for a ride. The drivers don't care. Why get into a possible altercation with a stranger over a couple of bucks, right? He says it's okay. Along the ride, Buddy feels that the driver is braking and accelerating too aggressively and believes that the driver is doing so intentionally to try and cause Buddy to get hurt in some way. He considers this a physical assault of sorts and wants me to forward the information to the local PD. This isn't something we would forward to the PD since nothing happened, and Buddy makes no claims of illegal driving behaviors. I'm making notes of everything so I can speak with the driver, get his point of view, and give him the feedback to be a smoother driver. I inform Buddy that in the future, if he feels his safety is in jeopardy at any point, he should phone the police, but this situation would be handled internally. I tell him that if a public or private service is putting your safety at risk, he'd want to either remove himself from the situation, if able, or phone the police, even both, depending on how serious he feels it is. Buddy wasn't impressed by that, claiming that if the driver's going to drive recklessly and endanger his safety, then he will have no hesitations to endanger the driver's safety in return, stating that in the future, if an accident occurs and he's injured, he would get up and throw the driver out the doors of the shuttle and follow through with endangering the driver's safety. Now we have a problem. We take all kinds of threats, small and large, very seriously. Drivers in both sectors get assaulted from time to time. So we do what we can to make sure we protect our employees. So far, I haven't taken any personal information of Buddy, strictly facts on the event. I ask him to verify his phone number, which he gives me. Then I tell him that based on the entirety of the information he's given me, that I will be forwarding his details to the PD to follow up because there is a potential safety concern for the driver. Buddy starts to freak out, swearing and trying to justify what he said. I tell him that from where I sit, I'm in no position to decide if he intends on following through, and due to the vulnerability of drivers, we have to report any and all physical threats to the PD. Furthermore, I don't know anything about him, and the seriousness of the threat has to be assessed by professionals. He hangs up. I give the PD a call and give them the details on the event as well as Buddy. This is a fairly routine process, something that our company goes through once every 1 to 2 months. They give me a file number for the police report and assure me that they'll be getting in contact with Buddy. I have to give them my information to provide a formal statement at a later date. A few days later, I get a call from the PD asking for a statement and to give me a follow-up. Buddy hung up on the officer once they informed him who was calling. With Buddy dodging their calls, they had no choice but to visit his residence. They were not able to give me any details on how it went, just that they spoke with them and that he wouldn't be causing any problems going forward. And our second story. Treat me like a child? Fine. Then expect to reap what you sow. So this happened this past weekend, and I'm just now reaping the rewards of my compliance. A little backstory. I just graduated from college this past May of 2017, and my parents let me move back in with them until I got a job and could afford to move out on my own. Growing up, I was always the good child out of my siblings and was always regularly compliant with everything they asked. I just wanted to keep my parents happy and didn't like making a fuss. I continued helping out when I moved back in, like doing chores without being asked, taking my sister to appointments, etc., just to help out my parents for letting me live there. Now, the thing about my dad is he's a major control freak. After I moved back in, he started giving me rules to follow, and if I didn't comply, I'd be kicked out. These rules kinda sucked. The worst being he gave me a curfew. And I know he was doing it to motivate me to get a job and move out so I wouldn't live in his basement forever. I just dealt with them and figured he'd cut it out when I got a job. Fast forward to the beginning of the year, I got a full-time job in my field and informed my parents of my plans to move out this summer when I had some money saved up. I figured this would be the end of my rules I had to follow. Wrong. Fast forward again to 3 weeks ago, I just gotten home from a long day at work and find a big piece of poster board on our kitchen table with Buck Nation's list of chores written on it in big letters with 6 chores written underneath it. Now, most of these chores were things I already did without being asked, like yard work and keeping my room clean. The only one I didn't do was that every other week my mom was supposed to give me a grocery list and I would buy all of the groceries on it. I realize I'm making money now and have no problem helping out with groceries if they just ask me to. That's not the problem here. The problem is that he put it on a huge poster like I'm 5 years old. I stewed in anger for a while, but ultimately forgot about the list. This is where the malicious compliance starts. This past Saturday, as my family and I are all watching TV together, my dad brings up the groceries and asks my mom to make a list. She hands it to me and my jaw dropped when I saw how long it was. It was so long, mainly due to my mom not having bought groceries in a while, so the fridge was empty. I then noticed how vague my mom had been with the list, assuming that I knew what brands of each item my family liked and that I would automatically know to pick out what we like to eat. This is where I started forming my plan. I told my parents I'd be back in a couple of hours and left. Like I said earlier, I very well knew what brands and types of foods my parents liked, but I also knew which brands they hated. I bought all of those wrong brands. For example, one item on the list was burgers. I knew they meant hamburgers, but I got turkey burgers instead. Also, things like getting skim milk instead of the normal whole milk we drink. Fat-free items instead of the regular versions. You get the point. I did this for every item on the list, even going so far as grocery store A being out of the wrong brand, so going to store B across the street to buy it. When I got back home and started putting everything away, my dad came to make sure I got everything and was speechless when he saw what I had bought. Noticing the look of disbelief on his face, I said, "What? I got every single thing on the list." He then asked for the list, and when I gave it to him, he said I knew what food my mom meant and called me an a-hole. I grinned and walked away. I have overheard him complaining to my mom about it multiple times this week, and the satisfaction I get each time is fantastic. The other thing is, since the fridge and pantry were empty, I bought way more of each item than they expected me to and filled both the fridge and pantry to the brims. My dad, being the anti-wasteful guy that he is, he'll be eating this stuff for weeks. And our last story. I own the house that you live in. My 29-year-old female dad married a woman named Maria a year ago after dating for 4 years. My dad wanted to buy a larger house for them to live in, but couldn't afford it without selling the home he lived in at the time, which is a unique property that he dearly loves. Although I now live abroad, I like the area he lives in, and my husband offered to buy a house there that my dad and Maria could live in. My dad agreed to this on the proviso that we not tell Maria that it wasn't him who paid for the house. This made no difference to me, so I agreed, and the house they live in is in my name, and they live there. I never planned to tell her. Recently, I went back to my home country and decided to stay with my dad for half my time there. The whole time, Maria made it clear I was an inconvenience and that me doing things with my dad was annoying to her. But I'm not a confrontational person, and I don't react to much, so I let it go. However, 2 days before I was due to leave, she came into my room and saw that I had my dad's dog on the bed. Now, this is a dog that my dad has had since before he met Maria and that I raised. Maria doesn't allow him on her bed, which is fine, but I've always had him sleep on mine. She flipped out, saying this was the final straw, that she'd had enough of me disrespecting her in her own home and I had to leave. I tried to de-escalate the situation, saying that we should just wait for my dad to sit down and talk this out, but she was adamant that I had to leave and that she had the authority to make me. After several minutes of me trying to explain to her that it was absurd of her to try to kick me out of my dad's house without talking to him, she said that what she said went, and since she married my dad, this is technically her house. I just chuckled and said since my name's on the deed, it's technically my house. But there's no need to get technical, we should just wait for my dad. She was shocked and left the room. When my dad came back, I told him what happened, and he went to speak to her. There was a shouting match, and she didn't speak to either of us until I left 2 days later. My dad's mad I told her, which I get, but since then I've also got texts from her kids saying I was the AH for telling her and making her feel like a guest in the house. This isn't the case. She isn't a guest, she's a tenant. But so is my dad. And the only point I was trying to make was that she didn't have any business trying to kick me out of my father's house, let alone my property. I didn't take it there until she did. Edit. Maria doesn't pay rent, so I don't know if that makes her a tenant, technically. If it does, then as a landlord, I'm pretty sure I have legal recourse over the remodeling she did without notifying me or my approval. And anyway, I wasn't there as a landlord, I was there as a guest of another tenant, and actually she did have several weeks' notice I was coming in any case. I'm sure it's a legal rabbit hole, but the only reason I use the word tenant is to say that she lives there, she isn't a guest in the home. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.